Dear colleagues and friends, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Brazilian Geotechnical Group. Today we are on a virtual interview with Professor Norbert Morgenstern. My name is Thiago Souza. I have the honor today to have a conversation with Dr. Norbert about his life and professional career. Dr. Norbert is a distinguished civil and geotechnical engineer. And before we start the conversation today, I would like to invite Professor Sérgio Fontoura to start the interview. Dr. Norbert, thank you very much. My gratitude for you accept my invitation. And now I will give the answers for Professor Sérgio Fontoura. Professor Sérgio, thanks again for your participation in this section.
Okay, thank you, Thiago and Professor Morgenstern. I received this phone call regarding this interview, and I accepted the task of participating because I was really glad to see you again and share this moment with you. So thank you very much for accepting the invitation of Thiago, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. And I've been listening to a number of interviews and lectures that you gave recently, and to warm up for this session. And I prepared here a few questions for you, but I think it would be, before asking the questions, perhaps to give at least an explanation. Why not read your CV? I think your CV is very long, but I would like to say a few things just to warm up for this. Professor Morgenstern, as you said, Thiago was born in Canada, in the city of Toronto. He graduated in Toronto University and went to Europe, to England, to obtain his graduate studies or his PhD. And he stayed there for a while until 1968. And then he returned to Canada. And in Canada, he developed a great career. He taught to a lot of students. If you go anywhere around the world, you will find a student of Professor Morgenstern. And we are very proud. We are also very proud, and we feel like we belong to a club. And this club is a club of former Professor Morgenstern students. According to awards, he has all the major awards in geotechnical engineering, all the major lectures. He gave these lectures. In Canada, he received many special awards from the government, from the society. And so we are with someone that is highly distinctive in this profession and in his career. So that's the reason we cannot read all his CV, and it would take all the time we have. But Professor Morgenstern, we prepared a few questions, and I would like to start asking you that you stayed in Imperial College during the years of 19, if I recall correctly, from 57 to 68.
Yes.
First as a graduate student and then as a professor there. And Imperial College at that time was the place in geotechnical engineering. And my question would be, what made you decide to move to U of A? What was the main reason that you said, well, it's time to go to a place, and you went to U of A? So could you elaborate the process, if you may?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question that has many perspectives as an answer. Firstly, by 1967-68, I was maturing as a professor, beginning to do a little consulting work, but there was a kind of repetition of work tied a little bit to the London clay problems and so on. And having had traveled a little bit around that time to other countries and seeing different geological settings, I was attracted to the idea of changing the, if you like, the geological world in which I was working, away from the stiff fissured London clay issues, which were interesting then and continue to be interesting, to wanting more variety to expand professionally. The second issue is a little more personal. We had just had our first child. We'd had a wonderful life in London up to that time, but we wondered whether we could afford to continue with that wonderful life, and perhaps we would go to another kind of community with a different social involvement and perhaps with a growing family, less financial pressures. That was part of the search for alternate places. So when I began to look at where I might go, I wasn't actively applying, but I got an invitation among the places that I knew a little bit about, because I'd traveled to Western Canada on a lecture tour in 1967. And I remember visiting Edmonton, where the University of Alberta is, and it had some history in geotechnical engineering in Canada. And I remember being impressed with the energy. The community was beginning to expand, beginning to take off. The technical problems were abundant, and the visions of development in that part of the world were very ambitious. And I remember saying to myself, at that time, a year before, saying, oh, if we ever went back to Canada, that looked like an interesting place to be. So a year later, just by coincidence, in a sense, we were offered a very nice job at the University of Alberta, and everything came together, looking for a sense of change in an environment that would be challenging technically. So that's the background, a combination of technical ambitions and family needs.
It's very interesting, because it really was a game change for U of A in geotechnical engineering, because it was also very good for U of A that you have decided.
Yeah.
And I think that looking at also listening to the interviews, I found a very interesting question that you were asked last year in Toronto during your life award achievement by you have this interview together with Professor Huck, and you were asked about amongst the things that happened in your career, which ones were that you felt more, or you feel more proud of? And you gave the following answer. Please correct me if I'm wrong. You said that in teaching and research, you would look at the students, that you are very proud of your former students, especially the ones that you meet in many places, and it's always good to see the history, and that was a big contribution. And the second was the technical aspect of profession, and you mentioned the oil sands engineering or oil sand development. So at that time, you have a tailing,
Yeah.
say involvement. And I have a question for you regarding this. You were in UK during the time there was the Aberfan disaster.
Yes.
It was in 1967,
Yeah.
or 66 maybe, and 144 people were killed at that time.
Yes.
And especially children, because the mass went through the school.
Yes.
And in 2015, here in Brazil, we had a major tailings dam failure.
Yes.
So that was a good more than 50 years separating the two. So in your say, career, in all the problems you had with tailing dams, what changed or what did not change? Because we had such a long span of time and the problems still exist. So I would like to hear your opinion about that and your reflection on this issue.
I think what didn't change for a long time was captured in the de Mello lecture that I gave, which many of you will undoubtedly know, that we had, I think, professionally, a sense of complacency that we knew more than we really did. And in a way, that's the theme of the recent lecture that we're discussing. And it took a long time, before we began to recognize the responsibility arising from lack of understanding of some of the things we were doing. But that was perhaps driven to a large degree by the lack of responsibility in the mining industry itself. So that going back to certainly the 1960s and even much later, dealing with waste was regarded as a cost issue to be minimized as cost and done, at least in hindsight, without care, without the sense of responsibility. And it took a very long time for the mining industry, at least even with the leading operations, to develop a safety culture that changed the way things are doing, and which we've done in the last few years. But the evolution of that safety culture has been a very painful learning experience. So there's a bunch of things. Part of it resides with our professional complacency that in another lecture I called embedded ignorance, which is illustrated in the most recent lecture, and to a large degree, the attitudes in the mining industry as a whole around the world, leading companies, in a sense, if you like, of neglect in terms of public policy. So there are two dimensions to the issue. Thank you for the question.
Okay, Professor Norbert. I have a question for you. What mentors, professors, or engineers inspire you?
Well, I think all the group that I worked at Imperial College inspired me, and they've taught me and gave me a great sense of wanting to follow them. Professor Ralph Peck was an inspiring person. I think Professor Michael Jamelkowski, that I had the pleasure of working with, were inspiring. I think the inspiration come from the breadth of understanding. Some were leading scholars in terms of basic research, but I think it was the working at the connection between the leading edge of knowledge and the leading edge of professional practice has always been my dream. And these are all people who excelled at that interface between fundamental findings and challenging applications. And that was the kind of culture that we tried to develop at the University of Alberta, I think fairly successfully, with the great achievements of many of our students.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Another question for you, Professor Norbert. You have a lot of projects, a lot of challenges. If you explain the big challenge, the big project, what's the experience you can explain for us?
Well, I think that's embedded in this lecture of From Certainty to Uncertainty. I think the evolution of safety culture and dealing with stability that Victor de Mello, I, and some others assisted in creating in Hong Kong was an important example of what we can do when we think in a more systems manner. I think some of the dams I've been involved in have been challenging in terms of dealing with complicated geology. I think it's a connection between geological understanding and geomechanical behavior are the things that have been satisfying and create a place for getting satisfaction out of challenge. I'm just nearing the end of many decades of work on a major hydroelectric project here, and with difficult foundations, it's been very satisfying. And of course, work in the oil sands was and remains an ongoing challenge because of the complexity of materials, and social and obligations in terms of tailings management, and of course the evolution of environmental considerations. So there are lots of examples I've been fortunate to participate in. Thank you.
Hello, Professor Norbert Morgenstern. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you.
Tiago also invited me to pose some questions, and I'm linked to Canada. I have been in Ottawa doing my PhD. I had an acceptance letter from also University of Alberta and University of Vancouver, but I decided for University of Ottawa because I used to work in Brasilia, state national capital of Brazil, and I thought that in that time it would be great or good to be there, close to the center of power of Canada, to know some people, etc. So let's also would like to remember some people that studied in Canada, University of Alberta. André Assis, my supervisor in the masters, and I think José Henrique Feitosa in memoriam, because we don't have him here anymore, worked with Professor Fredlund. So I'm linked to Canada to these people, and personal experience. Tiago invited me, and I have some questions here about your main conference, Certainty and Uncertainty over 64 years. This path to geotechnical engineering knowledge includes the discovery of the limitations that you got in the field, as you said in that conference. Terzag used it to say that 90% of our problems occur because we don't apply what the state of the art can offer. What's in your opinion about this statement today compared to the 60s and 70s? Do we currently have 90% of the state-of-the-art solutions to face the challenge in geotechnical engineering?
Well, I think as my lecture goes at some length to make a case, I think the evolution of performance-based design, when you fully understand all of its implications and its power, constitutes a major advance which many people have contributed to getting to the state of material characterization, instrumentation, and computation, to have high assurance that geotechnical structures and so forth will behave as intended. So the whole heart of that lecture was to indicate that without confronting the issues of uncertainty and developing tools to understand it better and interpret and make corrections, we would be in as bad shape as we were decades ago. But I'm very pleased with the evolution of that integration. Moreover, its rapid adoption in practice on major projects. So I think I'm repeating, in a sense, the heart of that lecture.
So let's go to the industry floor. We say here in Brazil, the chão de fábrica.
Yeah.
People here in Brazil say here. In the 60s, when you started as an engineering professional, and you were there in the Imperial College, which were the basic activities that you started to develop? For example, myself, when I started at the PhD University of Ottawa, I started doing some laboratory tests, and I was a teaching assistant there, and I used to have some friends inside the laboratory, and they say, "Oh, you are old, but you can perform the test yourself. So which were your activities?
Well, you have to remember that firstly, my research was on slope stability and all of the mechanics of that. I arrived at Imperial College at the time that Bishop had just produced his slip circle method, and the laboratory was expanding in the capacity we take for granted of measuring pore pressures and applying effective stress in practice. And that was novel even in anybody's practice at that time, that one could make reliable measurements. One began to understand stress path effects, and one had effective stress methods of analysis to put into practice and demonstrate that design would be improved with that integration of those set of concepts. And that was a very exciting time and a wonderful opportunity to build on that and to grow. As I began to get more experience, my bent was always somewhat more to the analytical side of things. Computing was just coming along. I did my first programming in what was called machine language, as opposed to some of the things we do today, very painful and so forth. So the other tool that we now take for granted is ease of calculation and so on. So all of those things I had the opportunity, I guess, the privilege to begin to integrate all of those to push forward as well. Plus, I was very close in my early career with Professor Skepton, who had a very broad range of interest and an insistence on understanding the geology of settings, geotechnical settings. So I think that was, and I was always very interested in the geological background in everything we do, and that's become quite fundamental in the way I approach problems. And I would say that one of the challenging part of our academic career, and even perhaps in practice, is the reduced educational opportunities and so on to understand geological settings and their complexity, at least in the shallow deposits we tend to work in. And we're now computing with these and we're measuring with these, and the education and experience with complicated geological settings plagues us, and that is part of the issue of some of the tailings dam failures that I've been involved in. I hope that answered the question. I'm not sure that it did.
Okay, very nice, Professor Norbert. About the persons, Bishop and Skepton, how do you describe Bishop and Skepton, the impact in your life and professional challenge?
Well, as a young academic, when I joined the staff, it was the practice for the whole gang, Bishop and Skepton, Gibson and David Henkel, Nick Ambrazes, who was a seismological colleague, and so on. We would all have lunch together every day, and the discussions would go from a theoretical issue to a practical problem, to a job that somebody was involved in. So once education for a young person like myself was expanded every lunch day. So I guess the important aspect was that the collegiality was very strong, and that was a hidden element of my evolution, to have the opportunity to be kind of engaged, partly at the outset as a listener, and as I matured a little bit more as a contributor to the kind of discussions of whether they're technical minutiae or challenging jobs or other things related to the academic world on an almost daily basis. So that's, I guess, the point that I would make to those who are still early on in your career. If you look for collegiality in the environment that you're living in and working in, whether it's academic or practice, and ensure that lifelong learning is encouraged at that stage. That's the critical issue, I think. Lifelong learning became became, if you like, organically embedded in me through those experiences. They were very, very important.
Yes, I'm back again.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the answers that you gave. I was this afternoon looking at a paper that you wrote and presented in Australia in the year 2000, and it was entitled "Common Ground."
Yes, I remember it. Yeah.
And in this paper, you reflect on the unifying concept of the elements that put together geotechnical engineering, and you establish three main components: soil mechanics, rock mechanics, and geological engineering, or engineering geology. And it's an exciting paper, and you formulate several questions there, and you answer, of course, the question that you formulate, and you end up with the point of what is the value of geotechnical engineering that is added for the society. And I'd like to hear you elaborate about that, because I think it's very important, because it describes perhaps very well your philosophy for geotechnical engineering.
Well, I guess I think embedded in the lecture, which I haven't looked at for a very long time, was the sense of the commonality of the issues that the three, if you like, disciplines that we rely on have together, and that some of the separations that have come by having separate societies are hinder the transfers. I don't think I was successful in that lecture, because I think I was promoting more integration among the societies, and that, for a number of reasons, was not as effective as I had hoped. I would say these days I'm not as mobile as I used to be, and I walk almost every day with my colleague, Professor Derek Martin, whose background is in rock mechanics, and we share discussions about various assignments and so forth. This experience reinforces the fact that breaking down the discipline boundaries enriches all of our work, particularly when you're dealing with natural materials, with their discontinuities and strain weakening and brittleness and so on. I think we can still do better in crossing discipline boundaries, and what I'm pleased about in the world of, because I'm a great advocate, of course, of performance-based design now, that it forces that crossing of boundaries, because you can't isolate yourself from the harder materials, from the softer materials, and so on and so forth, when you're looking at totality on the structure. So I think the intent, I would still support the intent of that paper on common ground, but I would say we haven't become as common as integrated as we should.
A very important point, and I think that it has some kind of implication on the way we teach the subject.
Yeah, that's an important point. That's an important point. Yeah.
To encourage the students to. And I still remember that in one of our brief conversations back in the 70s, you mentioned that one should never be afraid of moving and studying a new subject.
Yeah.
And at that time, you were already working on permafrost,
Yeah.
unsaturated soils,
Yeah.
rock mechanics, tailing dams, and that's a very wide range of things. And that is as a piece of, say, example for students, especially the ones who are beginning their career, to sort of have this as a light to discover. But so it's and I also had a chance of flipping through my notes, and I had a reference from 1968 in a rock mechanics book, Rock
Oh,
Mechanics and Engineering Practice. And you wrote a chapter on this
yeah.
on this book, Stag and Sienkiewicz, and it's a book on rock mechanics. One, if you consider that the ISRM was formed in 1966,
Yeah.
1968 you had a chapter. So you also worked in rock mechanics, which is
Well, I was actually, uh, we had at Imperial College, rock mechanics was not taught in the geotechnical program in my day, but it was taught in the hydraulics program by Professor Charles Yeager, who is a consultant to English Electric doing dams around the world. And he was kind of self-taught, and he gave lectures in their graduate program. But he retired from that post, and I took up teaching rock mechanics at Imperial College in, I guess, 68, 66 or so on, thinking that I would take take a hand in the kind of integration that I was beginning to believe in. But the mining department subsequently retained Everett Hook, and of course Everett had very good connections in the mining industry, and the need for the rock mechanics to grow in the mining department, which wasn't well integrated with civil engineering at Imperial College, was really important, and that kind of swamped the early efforts that I had in teaching rock mechanics. But certainly the paper that you write, which is kind of written from a soil mechanics perspective, was my early entry into attempting integration, which I never fully achieved academically, but have achieved, if you like, internally. I would add that I think I remember going to the first international conference on rock mechanics. I guess it was in Lisbon, and some of us had the view that we would make a case not to form a separate society and try to have an integrated society. That view was rejected by many of the leaders from Europe, and of course they did form a separate society. In my sense, in hindsight, it was a little arrogant to inhibit that growth, of that it needed that singularity in order for it to expand effectively, given the problems that existed. But we now need to learn from each side, both in terms of geomechanical perspectives as well as instrumentation and so on.
yeah, and I have one final comment here that I have to make, is that during your time as president of the International Society, I still recall that you created the series of conference for young geotechnical engineers. You promoted that extensively, and one of them was held in Brazil. And I am not sure if you still remember that you encouraged us to promote that. In South America, we received funds from help from the Canadian government, and that was one of the concern. Today, in every meeting, we have a separate meeting for the young engineers, and that was just due to some kind of your effort as well. So when you think back, are you happy the way it developed? Say the integration of the young, even mid-career engineers into the main conferences.
Well, I'm glad that you remember that so favorably, because that tradition still exists here. The Young Engineers Conference, or the portion of a conference set for young engineers, is very productive and encouraging, and makes people more, let's say, more comfortable and at ease, and more ambitious intellectually and so on. And I don't know how broad it is. I haven't followed the details of society meetings recently, but I'm very pleased that you remember that in such a favorable manner. It's something that we must continue to do in order for in order for our subject to evolve. Plus, I mean, there are tools out there that only young engineers can understand these days, and they're as opposed to some of the tools that you get a little blunted with at my age.
So let's go here. Again, you are being bombarded by a lot of questions, but we are having fun here, Professor.
Yeah.
I have, sorry. I have two questions, and they are coming in the sequence of Professor Sergio Fontoura. We realized how your objectives were driven by practical applications. You said that you learned from the field and not from the research and teaching, that the theories, they have a lot of limitations. So how long did it take to become involved in a geotechnical project, and you felt confident that your experience were sufficient to sleep well at night, knowing that most of the known uncertainties had been addressed, so you would not need to spend several years living in Brazil?
Well, the lecture of From Certainty to Uncertainty in 64 Years is the attempt to answer that question. It was a gradual and incremental learning process to find things that were within codes and within common practice really were deficient when you went outside their range of empirical assessment. It's easy to say that that's so obvious, but it isn't so obvious when you're dealing with commercial practice or rush practice and so on and so forth. So it's been evolutionary, and I think by about 20, 30 years ago, I was beginning to make a point in some of my research and some of the publications, the learnings from challenging cases, to emphasize the need to recognize limitations in an ongoing manner. And that's been a big driver in my mindset. Fortunately, the tools have come along to help address the problems that we could never have imagined in the 60s or 70s or even later. Plus, the other interesting thing I must say that for the, if you like, the ambitious academic as I was in the past, the need to go to different locations and get local experience is also important. For example, some of you may know that I came to Brazil. I must have been, first visit might have been in 1972, and did some teaching in Rio at Papuki, and that was motivated by the need to understand residual soils, because I was beginning to be asked questions about residual soils and why are better. I remember Professor Costa Nunes helping me and others, and made periodic visits to Brazil, as did later my colleague Dan Eisenstein, and so on. So one's curiosity should take you around trying to get experience in other environments as well. I hope that helps answer the question.
Oh, great. That's great. So I'm going to show some parallels here. I'm going to try an experience. I used to work too in the pavement field, and we do need a lot of standards for serviceability. So pavements require high serviceability standards. However, the prevalence of potholes and rutting poses a significant challenge for the field. In light of this issue, what advice would you offer to pavement professionals to address both strength and deformation concerns, taking into account environmental loads and specific circumstances within the field? It's worth noting too that achieving a cost-effective pavement solution proves elusive in every country due to the variations in predictions versus actual performance. what I say here, everywhere you have potholes.
Well, you're probably by the question better equipped to answer that than I am. I haven't worked on pavement-related issues, but the answer should deal with the reality around the world. It's kind of a cost-benefit issue, but I think the costs have to be not just the local construction costs. They've got to be the social costs. They've got to be all kinds of other costs that if you don't invest in the outset. And I think that and you can perhaps help answer the question that I'm going to ask, that aren't the cost-benefit analyses of many pavement designs limited in their vision of what the costs associated with not doing things better at the outset. So it's often a short-term vision in terms of making the investment, and I think perhaps the standards in the most general sense have to be raised in order to make that case. But this is surmise because I'm not experienced in that class of problems.
Okay, Professor Norbert, I have 2 questions.
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry for a lot of questions.
Fine, it's a pleasure.
About Victor de Mello, in my understanding, your relationship with Victor de Mello was amazing. Can you describe it for us?
Well, we didn't work a lot on I think probably Hong Kong was one place we worked together. I might have worked on a couple other things, but I found him one of the most imaginative people that I've encountered and most enthusiastic. So one could never leave a social or professional meeting with Victor without being enriched. I didn't always agree on some technical detail and so on, but it was always a special pleasure to discuss and to debate and to work together. And I think as the de Mello lecture that I gave showed the perhaps one of our joint with some others contributions was to indicate the remarkable success of advising an improvement, not just in a technical detail, but the evolution of the safety culture in Hong Kong that led to a dramatic reduction in deaths in that society. And that came out of if you like, a sort of concern about holistic activities as opposed to single geotechnical details. And Victor was very good in understanding those things. So, well, he was certainly gave me some guidance in our discussions at those times. So it was always a thrill to be with him and to work with him. Plus,
okay, very nice.
Social occasions were wonderful as well.
Okay, amazing. Professor Norbert, the last question for you is, what advice would you give a young person starting an activity as a geotechnical engineer?
I'm pausing because there are so many challenges for a young person today.
Yes.
I have 7 grandchildren, and this is a common discussion. None of them are geotechnical engineers, but they're all very, very active young minds. I think one of the challenging things, other than get experience and work with best people and ask questions and be inquisitive and be geologically sensitive, I think the big challenge anybody who's starting out in their career today is to wonder how AI is going to affect their activities and affect the environment in which they do work and so on. There's no simple answer to that. We're all learning at the moment, but the evolution of these tools is dramatically going to affect the professional lives of everybody, and certainly the young person is right in the firing line. And those are discussions I have whenever my grandchildren come and we have dinner together. They teach me what they're doing in that area, and it's always a learning how rapidly some of these intellectual aids are affecting the workplace. So I would, other than if you like the usual advice of gain experience and so on, and work with good people and all of that, I think that's the new dimension of learning for anybody starting out in their career.
Okay, very nice. Professor Norbert, thanks again for your participation in Geotecnia Brasil group. Sérgio, please, you can finish this interview.
Well, I am the one who must say thank you for you, Thiago, to give me the opportunity to share this moment
Thank you.
with Professor Morgenstern. And I must confess that I never had the courage and to say in a straight face that I call him Nordi Morgenstern. I would like to do this, but all the time I have this idea in my mind of Professor Morgenstern. But anyway, I looked at, and just to close, I would like just to say a few words of thank, because maybe some of you or perhaps the viewers would not know, but the PhD program of PUC Rio, PUC, was created thanks to a special grant from the Canadian government, CIDA, through the CIDA agency, and also with the participation of U of A. And Professor Morgenstern played a very important role, as well as the professor from the structural engineering. And we have our PhD program started exactly due to this push. And that's a demonstration of the generosity and the personality of Professor Morgenstern as a person, always contributing to the new generation and to share his knowledge. And we, as a student at that time, we could observe that every time we would approach his office, he would have his door open, and we could just knock at the door, and if he was not very busy, he could say, listen to us. So, Professor Moore, thank you very much. I really am very happy and touched with that. So I hope everybody feels the same and could listen to that and take the knowledge from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me give you a little footnote. Where I live there are many is a small town of about 10,000 people, but a lovely place in the mountains, and there are quite a number of retired geotechnical engineers here, and some from Brazil, and we recently had the first meeting of the CANMOR, which is the Community Social, Geotechnical, and Social Dining Club. And you may all know Heinrich Heinz, who was
for sure.
Heinrich was one of the leading members of this social and geotechnical dining club, and Angela Cooper was here as well. So we have a strong Brazilian focus going on even among us semi-retired people.
Wow!
Yes.
Say hello to them.
I will indeed. I will indeed.
Thank you very much. That's very nice to hear this. Yeah.
Take care, everybody. Good luck to you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.